Ahoy! I'm very frustrated that I have to make this video, but the Season 4 update is absolutely disastrous all in all. So things got worse than they already were with Season 4, with the announcement today that the Glacial Tarn expedition will be temporarily disabled until a fix is able to be applied. And this is extremely frustrating if you know what's behind this. So what's happening, among various other bugs that we'll get to, is that the players in the expedition are crashing and the expedition is resetting. They're freezing and the expedition is resetting. Now, why this is so frustrating is because we reported this very bug on the PTR. We said, hey, we tried the expedition multiple times. Every time we went into M1 or higher, with the flame buff especially applied, it seems that may be causing the issue. We get freezes. The game tells us that there's lag detected, and then we crash and we cannot get back into the dungeon that we were just running. And now this bug made it to live, and they have to take down the expedition for it. And again, it is not the only bug. So, of course, there's the saying, never play on patch day. There are obviously some issues, some hiccups to be expected whenever a new patch deploys. But in this case, what led up to it makes it so extremely frustrating. We had significant content cuts for Season 4. We didn't get the Season Trial with mutators, which may not even get mutators in the future now. We didn't get the Season Trinket, we didn't get the main story update, we didn't get the new Heart Rune, which I'm fine with. We didn't get the seasonal territory control, and we are getting delays on the whole cross-world thing because they want to add some more to it with a group finder. Fair enough. But this was all cut, and one of the reasons they gave us, or the main reason they gave us for cutting this, was that they were not happy with the state of the releases that they've had lately, that there are too many bugs and they want to take it slower. And this is something that we've been hearing ever since the game came out pretty much, or ever since they had that first big talk where they started addressing things. So why is it that when almost all of the content is cut, the content that is there is not even functioning? Because this is not the only part that isn't functioning. The season story is also bugged for at least a lot of players. I don't know if for everyone, but there are significant progression issues with that at the moment, where people get stuck on certain things, where the progression just doesn't unlock. Sometimes you can get around it by restarting the game, sometimes you can't, and then there's a second situation where you get stuck again. So I don't even know if anyone has fully completed it yet. Maybe some people have, but anyways, if you get unlucky and you get a bug, you are stuck there as well, and that's going to affect a lot of the players, at least the ones that I've talked to so far. And the whole patch itself was already delayed in order to fix another bug, so it's not like they didn't have the extra time to sort things out in that regard. And one of the reasons why the whole season story thing is probably way more bugged than it should be is that on the early launch of the PTR, you couldn't access the entire story. And by the time they actually made the entire story available, I feel like a lot of players just didn't bother going on PTR anymore. I don't think many people logged back just to finish the story when they're going to do it on live again anyways. So again, something that probably could have been avoided. Then there's the oversight of a very basic feature when you introduce a new item. The Frigid Dawn set, which is a named set and should obviously be upgradable at the Gypsum Kiln for the last perk, does not allow you to do exactly that. For some reason, you can just random roll it, which makes no sense in the context of this being named. There are other sets from this expedition that are not named in the same way, where it makes perfect sense that they cannot be upgraded, but in this case, it should really be the case. The dot scaling on Inferno is also still bugged. If you use it with strength, then your damage on any dot is pretty much halved. And this is a similar issue for int gems as well, I think, and for focus gems. Again, all things that have been reported. That's, I think, the biggest frustrating aspect of all of this, is that most of the stuff I'm talking about here isn't new. It is a direct consequence of how PTR was handled and of bug reports from PTR not being fixed. I wouldn't necessarily say they were ignored, but maybe they just couldn't recreate them, or maybe they just didn't have time to fix them before the patch, which obviously should have led to a delay of the patch, or at least the parts of the patch that are bugged, but we got everything at once and it's not working. And again, it's not like this patch had a particularly high amount of content. It was a relatively small number of new additions, so you'd expect that if we get less content and it has to be delayed for fixes, then at least those few things work. But, well, the only thing that currently seems to work properly is the Winter Warrior event that was basically just a copy-paste from last year with a few new items, as well as the new artifact drops, which are just adding an item to a drop pool, so it's really not that hard in the first place. Now, every time I bring up issues like this, I see a lot of shots being fired at the developers. And I don't necessarily think that they are the right target. They often get called incompetent and don't know what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. And I don't necessarily agree with every design choice that they're making, and I'm very clear about that, for example, in the context of the arena reward changes, which I think are just completely ridiculous and not thought through at all. But at the end of the day, the devs can only work with what's available to them. A dev team has limited time, limited resources, and they have instructions from above on what exactly they need to do. And I believe that on one hand, some of the instructions coming from above are just misguided. I don't know from how high up they are coming. The priorities are just strange. I'd rather have them release this patch with like 5, 7 big pieces of new content, and then it's fine if 2 of them are bugged because you've had at least some other ones that are playable, than have a situation like this, but you know, that's another story. But the biggest issue that also prevents that from happening is that I think the dev team or the resources that they're provided with are just way too little, way too small. SLOTH engine or Lumberyard or whatever the CryEngine version of that was beforehand is a very niche engine to begin with, so it's probably very hard to hire for that, and we've seen that they have positions that are open for long amounts of time because it seems to be very difficult for them to fill them. And maybe beyond that, Amazon also doesn't want to increase their funding by significant enough of an amount for them to be able to hire more effectively. We know that they are kind of planning to use the same engine for a lot of the rings, which in that context would make sense to train people up on the New World engine, make them practice on New World essentially, in order to be able to work with a lot of the rings later on. But then they also recently mentioned that a lot of the rings team only has 5 people at the moment, so maybe the focus on that is also not as big as it initially seemed. So all in all, these issues piling up and not being resolved since PTR as well, to me seems like it's a direct result of the team just being too small, the team just not being able to keep up with anything, and that's being their constant struggle throughout the year. They have so many ideas, so many things that they want to do and that they're talking about in the distant future, but whenever they're talking about something like that, it always feels like it's at least a year away, because the pace at which they can do anything seems to be so incredibly slow because there just aren't enough people working on things. I believe this really hamstrings New World's potential because you have people that are motivated, that have all of these ideas, and you have a base game that looks nice and is great in terms of combat mechanics, that if built upon could be one of the biggest players in the MMO space in my opinion, but because they can't make progress fast enough, and even when they try to slow down, things still break constantly, it's just massively held back. And today is just one of those days where that really shows in its worst form. Anyways, more on the new artifacts later. Consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you're interested in that. If you want to chat with me directly and get early trading tips, feel free to support me on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who do exactly that. And thank you for watching. SLOTH out.